These are Ukraine's newest recruits in a conflict at a crossroads. This Friday, President Trump will host President Putin on American soil. But in these peace talks, 2 is company and 3 is a conundrum. As President Zelenskyy has not yet been invited, and his request to join has support in Europe. In a joint statement issued late last night, European leaders said that while they welcomed President Trump's work to bring peace and security for Ukraine, the path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. We remain committed to the principle that international borders must not be changed by force.
We are preparing intensively for this meeting at European level, together with the American government. And we hope and assume that the government of Ukraine, that President Zelenskyy, will be involved in this meeting. In any case, we cannot accept that territorial issues between Russia and America are discussed or even decided over the heads of Europeans and Ukrainians.
But last week, President Trump hinted that an agreement could entail the loss of Ukrainian territory, which President Zelenskyy has long fought against.
We will not allow this second attempt to partition Ukraine. Knowing Russia, where there is a second, there will be a third. That is why we stand firm on clear Ukrainian positions.
This defiant response to the Alaska meeting is part of a pattern of working difficulties with Washington.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people.
In February, President Zelenskyy was famously kicked out of talks with his country's largest single donor, who plan to turn off the tap if a deal cannot be reached.
Americans, I think, are sick of continuing to send their money, their tax dollars to this particular conflict. But if the Europeans want to step up and actually buy the weapons from American producers, we're okay with that, but we're not going to fund it ourselves anymore.
This is the vice president with the Foreign Secretary David Lammy. But their happy transatlantic relationship will be under pressure if a deal agreed by Russia and the U.S. is unacceptable in Europe. This is Zaporizhzhia today, a region partially occupied by Russia, still under attack. What does the deal mean here?
I mean, I'm here now, and what I can tell you is it's really mixed messages. They're really tired. They're really sick of the war. But they really are concerned about Zaporizhzhia and Kherson because they're very important areas of Ukraine, particularly for mineral wealth.
There are big questions facing the Alaska meeting. Washington now says it's working on talks between Ukraine and Russia. So will President Zelenskyy appear? As it stands, Ukraine's president will not be at the table. The problem is his country is firmly on the menu.
With me here is Anthony Gardner, who served as US ambassador to the European Union. And in Kent is Professor Mark Galeotti, who's an expert on Russian security affairs and heads the MIAC intelligence consultancy firm. Let's turn to you first, Anthony Gardner. I mean, in one day today, we've had growing distance between Europe and the US over Gaza and over Ukraine. I mean, has the US just stopped caring what Europe thinks?
Well, it's made very clear what it wants. I mean, Trump wants a deal in Ukraine at any price, I would argue. I don't think he particularly cares about the fate of Ukraine, which is a massive mistake in my view. On this issue of the upcoming meeting, it is a moment of maximum danger. Maximum danger because Trump is in haste to get a deal. Second, because Putin thinks he's winning because of manpower advantages, munitions advantages. And third, because we know from history that cutting a deal about a country over the heads of its leaders never ends well. We've seen that in Czechoslovakia and Poland and so on. So it's very clear. The U.S. is saying we'd like a deal. Trump was eyeing a Nobel Peace Prize. The real issue is security guarantees, and it's not very clear who's going to provide them.
Right. But Mark Galeotti, you don't get a Nobel Peace Prize, do you, by siding with the aggressor? Is that what President Trump is doing? Giving President Putin what he wants?
To a degree, yes, he is offering Putin what he wants. But to go back to Ambassador Gardner's point, I mean, as far as Putin is concerned, he is winning. His forces are pushing forward. And although at terrible cost, Putin doesn't have to fight forever. He just needs to be able to fight longer than Ukraine can. So I think in those circumstances, the irony is that the Russians think they're actually offering something just by simply saying, we will stop invading any more of Ukraine. The key problem is therefore that both sides have such wildly different perceptions of what's going on and what is right.
What does, Professor Galeotti, Putin actually want or expect to get out of this? Because his red lines and Ukraine's red lines are not compatible, are they?
No, and that's a really important point because, whatever is agreed between Presidents Trump and Putin, it still will actually have to be agreed by the Ukrainians because there's no way to stop them from fighting or whatever. But when you come back to this in terms of what Putin wants, and to a degree, who knows quite what's going on there. But I mean, I think it is clear. First of all, just simply sitting down with an American president at a time when there have been so many efforts to isolate him is already a win. Secondly, he would like to have a deal which means that he can essentially have stolen 20% of Ukraine and get away with it with sanctions relief as well. But if all else fails, if there is some kind of a deal struck that the Ukrainians refuse, which is entirely possible, he will also be, as far as he's concerned, winning because he will cast the Ukrainians as the problem.
Well, there we go. Do you see that as what's really going on here? The President Putin sees this as an opportunity to isolate Ukraine. And it's evident by the fact that we don't even know if President Zelenskyy is going to be allowed to show up.
Completely. Look, he's repeated his maximalist positions now several times. There's no indication that Trump is putting meaningful pressure on Putin right now, aside from some rhetoric about tightening of sanctions, but that actually hasn't happened. So in my view, this meeting is premature. It should happen. It should have happened after we provided Ukraine with proper air defenses, after we provided Ukraine with proper munitions. At that point, if we were able to prove to Putin, you are going to pay serious costs, you're not going to win. At that point, a meaningful dialogue can occur.
But President Trump is taking a big gamble here, isn't he? It's a big risk because he paints himself as the deal maker. And I mean, will there be a deal at the end of this?
I'm doubtful. I'm doubtful there will be a deal for the reasons I mentioned. The core issues I mentioned before is security guarantees. Remember, 1994, the so-called Budapest Memorandum was a document in which the UK, Russia, and the United States gave security guarantees to Ukraine in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons. Now, we all know that those guarantees weren't worth the paper they were written on. So for Ukraine, in the position of Zelenskyy, there's no way you can simply give away territory without something meaningful. And the meaningful will be what happens if Russia again seeks more territory. This is a crucial point. Because a fake deal, one that simply recognizes where the contact point is between the forces without providing those security guarantees is simply a prologue to Russia deciding later on to take another bite at the apple.
Well, indeed. And Professor Galeotti, I mean, where do you think this is actually heading? Is President Zelenskyy going to be included somehow? Because Putin has said he doesn't want that, right?
Yeah, I think it's unlikely that there's going to be a tripartite meeting. It may well be that then there's something else afterwards, a Trump-Zelenskyy meeting just to save face or whatever, but I don't think so. Again, from Trump's point of view, it's clear that he wants a deal. He wants the glory of being a deal maker, and he also just simply wants to disconnect himself from what's going on in Ukraine.
Can I just ask you before you finish?
Zelenskyy there makes it harder.
Just finally and briefly, is all this a bit of a shambles?
It is a shambles, but welcome to Trump world. I mean, usually summits have the principles, the president's coming in right at the end.
At the end, right? Yeah.
Sorted. But this is just not the way Trump works. And Putin also likes these kind of chaotic opportunities where, he can catch the other side sort of without knowing what's coming up next.
Well, Professor Galeotti and Anthony Gardner, we'll see who has the upper hand.